Media has taken power from women in fiction as women have threatened men's power in real life. Hi everyone, my name is Sofia, and today I'm gonna be talking about the villainization of female historical characters in mass media and its effect on society and importance. First of all, we need to understand why mass media is so relevant to today's society and to societies in general. As of 2011, teenagers consumed 10 hours and 45 minutes of mass media content daily, and the day has 24 hours, so that means that 10 hours out of that are spent on mass media by teenagers in 2011. And that was 10 years ago. So really, how much has that number probably increased because of the pandemic and everything going on around the world and the massification of social media? First of all, we need to understand what's mass media. So mass media refers to anything that appeals to the masses, basically. So it includes publicity, such as ads. It includes also TV shows, movies, and even music. It's just things that appeal to the masses of the world. Media is a really useful tool to understand society because media, the thing that's interesting about media is that it helps to portray already existing stereotypes, and it also helps to create new stereotypes. So it basically it has control of many things, media, and that's something that we often don't realize. The power of media on ourselves and on our whole communities. Media helps to give implied messages. So for girls, it's often that their worth is aligned with their physical appearance and what others think of them. So a girl's worth is so often associated with, according to me, not according to me, it's often associated with their physical appearance and what others think of her. This really is related to the male and female gaze, but that's something I'm gonna be discussing on another video. But so this is what media tells women, and especially little girls, and this is a woman's life entirely in mass media. Women, and especially girls, are told that their value relies on their physical appearance and how others perceive them. And this is said through so many ways. Even female cartoon characters are over sexualized, and this also applies to the male and female gaze. But those are topics for other videos, so I'm not gonna get into that. And on the other hand, media this also affects boys because it's telling boys that physical appearance is what it's important on a girl or a woman. So that's it's really problematic. To have a better society, we have to accurately represent it through mass media because that's what appeals to the masses, and by applying to the masses, it's also what appeals to girls and boys, or however you identify, which are the future and hope of humanity. So accurate representation and also inclusive and diverse representation is relevant to improve society because, as I said, women media helps portray society, but it can also help to create a better or worse society. So it's something that's really relevant, something that we often don't realize because media is really part of our lives because it's everywhere. It's massified. So it's important to consider that. And going on into the topic, that was just the introduction of the historical period drama factor. There's a lot of movies and TV shows, which is what I'm gonna be focusing on, that represent historical characters but however, historical characters or events that aren't always historically accurate. And I understand that it's fiction, so they're not gonna stick to the original story. But I think that it's important that to a certain point characters, like especially when we're talking about like historical adaptation, that characters have something accurate. Like I understand adding drama so to make it more interesting and appealing, but there's a difference between villainizing a character, which will help to perpetuate stereotypes, today's stereotypes, and there's a difference between that and just adding a bit more drama to make the story more interesting. So that's something really important to consider. This is relevant in the topic of female representation in mass media because TV shows and movies often give like a certain idea of how certain female characters that actually lived. That's the relevance of changing historical characters because they actually lived. Is that it gives the idea that they were like this way, and people often don't check if this is historically accurate. So this really could be considered manipulating history through mass media to affect the masses and to give a certain message. This is manipulating history. Going into the topic of the video, which is villainization of female characters in media, I'm gonna be talking about two characters specifically, which is the ones that I think are really interesting examples of this villainization. These are Anne Boleyn and Marie Antoinette. I think they're really similar characters, which is also why I like. And they're similar and they're interesting. And they're often portrayed in a villainous way. Start with Anne Boleyn. We need to understand that she's often portrayed in many movies and TV shows. I'm gonna put some examples. As a homewrecker, and that as this person, this woman that seduced King Henry VIII and manipulated him, and that she was this selfish woman that, and she wanted power, blah 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 blah. She was a homewrecker, blah, so mean. This is often what's said in mass media. However, we really need to take history, like accurate history, into account and include that Anne Boleyn in today's society was, in my opinion and in some other historians' opinion, sexually harassed. She was chased by King Henry VIII. She didn't chase him, he chased her. And that's really important because we need to put ourselves into her shoes. Like, how are you supposed to say no to the King of England in the 15th century? That's something, of course, that you can technically, but what about your life? What about your family? You really couldn't say, oh no, I don't want to be your mistress. Or could you? It's really important to consider that because the things are portrayed often the other way. They portray Henry VIII as the victim and Anne Boleyn as the harasser, basically, and that like seducer, that she seduced him when it wasn't like that. Not only in this, she's a victim, she's also a victim in how she was also villainized in her times because she was blamed of so many things like adultery, incest, just because King Henry VIII wanted to get rid of her. And this is something that is almost never portrayed accurately in media because they portray her as a homewrecker and as a manipulative woman. And this is something that Taylor Swift has often referred to, and it's that we have different language to refer to what a woman does and what a man does. But that's something really interesting to take into account. The language and the connotations of how we describe certain things. Quote a book by Karen Lindsay, author of Divorced, Beheaded, Survived, a feminist interpretation of the wives of Henry VIII. And this is about Anne Boleyn. She could reiterate her desire to keep her chastity and her honor, but clearly he didn't respect that. She could ignore his letter and stay away from court, but he refused to take the hint. To offer him the outright insult he asked for would be to risk not only her own, but her father and brother's career at court. She undoubtedly kept hoping he would tire of her and of the chase and transfer his attentions to some newer lady-in-waiting. But he didn't, and she was dropped. There was no chance of her making a good marriage when every eligible nobleman knew the king wanted her. On the other hand, Marie Antoinette, she's also a really similar character. How, in terms of how she was both treated in her own time and in today's society, she's always portrayed as this selfish, superficial young girl. But there's some things about real life, the historical accuracy that we need to consider. The first of all is that she was 14 years old when she was married. And many people say, oh yeah, but that's normal for the time. Yeah, okay, maybe, but she was still a girl. That doesn't mean that she was prepared to run a country. She was Austrian and she had to leave her whole life behind. She actually never saw her family after moving to France again. So she really left her whole life behind at 14 years old. And she never saw her parents or family again. She started speaking another language. So it was a whole change of life, and I think that's something that's important to consider. She was 14 years old when she was married to Louis. So besides having to leave her life behind and marrying at 14, she she was also really she wasn't liked at the time in France because she was seen as this foreign princess, naive, and there was a lot of propaganda against her. Like you can just search on Google propaganda against Marie Antoinette, and there's so many things disgusting that were made about her, and these help to villainize like the public perception of her in France. Adding to like the public perception that French people had of her, she was also unable technically to produce a male heir for a long time. I believe it was 7 years. She and Louis didn't consummate the marriage after, like maybe they did. I don't know. So she was technically unable to produce a male heir for a long time. Like she eventually had children, but for a long time they didn't. Her and Louis, they didn't have children, and that was something really important. The time that was basically the top priority of a queen, to give birth to a male heir. So she was also disliked for that. Like she is young, she's foreign, she's really superficial, and she hasn't even produced a male heir. All of these factors help to add up to what the public perception people had of her. In relation to the let's make cake thing, like statement, I don't know for sure, but it was probably not said about her. The Latte cake first appeared in a book by Jean-Jacques Rousseau in around 1767. It was first of all said by a great princess. People always say that it was said by Marie Antoinette as a queen, but this was said, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, this was said by a great princess. And also the dates, 1767. In 1767, she was around 12 years old, and also the French Revolution didn't really like officially began until 1789 or around those dates. So it doesn't really add up that she said it, or maybe she did say it. Like it's really unlikely that she said it, but even if she did say it, it was probably referring to something else. So really giving her the credit for that, I think really has helped to villainize her in both her times and nowadays. We must also consider that women weren't. She was king, she was queen, yeah, but women weren't that powerful. Even if she was queen, she wasn't that powerful to make like political decisions. Queens were often just a symbol, and kings were the ones that took care of like political and public affairs. She was just a symbol for people to look up to. So she didn't have a lot to do. Like I found this from an article. I'm gonna cite it over here. It says, blaming Marie Antoinette for the collapse of the French economy and the famine is like blaming Lena Dunham for COVID-19. Sure, she could have said something, done something, but no matter what, its significance in the grand scheme of the problem would be infinitesimal. And I think that's a really quote that really adds it up. We often like to associate that it was her spendings or that she did something really bad or maybe not that she did something, but the things that she didn't do to help the French people. But yeah, but that was her reality, and she didn't have actual political power. So can you really blame her for being like, yeah, she lived in her bubble and everything, but she wasn't. She was just a girl. Honestly, that's my opinion. She was just a girl. It's not. France's economic problems were coming from before. I think that depicting her as selfish and superficial, both in mass media and nowadays, really says a lot about who we blame. And this is also going back to Anne Boleyn, when there's certain situations, like controversial situations, that we usually blame women instead of men. And that's really relevant to society because it's telling us that if something goes wrong, it's usually because of a woman. And it also leads up to like the ancient, that's not so ancient belief that like men are better than women, they're smarter, blah 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 blah. So it's really important to be aware of how the effect of portraying inaccurately these two female historical characters isn't only like bad because of like the historical accuracy and that manipulating history, but it's also bad because it has a subconscious effect on how on society, a subconscious effect on society. And we must be aware that if we don't change how women are represented, especially those that are based on a real historical figure, we won't be able to improve our society and to advance for a fairer and more equal society. So in relation to teenagers and children, it's important because, as I said it in the beginning, like this is telling boys, oh, women are always to blame, they're the villains, and this is telling girls, women are often the villains. So it's something really important to consider, and it's also important that because of the effect it has on teenagers and children, because children and teenagers, as I think I already said it, they are the future and the hope of humanity. So teach them that this is how society works. Then how are we going to expect that society improves? Just wrapping everything up, I think that it's really relevant, just really relevant, the female representation, accurate and diverse female representation is really important to achieve. And we also must realize of the subconscious effect it has on us. Villainization of female historical characters is a problem because of how it portrays things, and it also shows that there's not been an advancement on many things. Anne Boleyn lived in the 15th century and Marie Antoinette lived on the 18th century. We still judge them really similarly to how they were judged during their times. So like that really says a lot about the problematic issues of how female historical characters are often represented in mass media. So thank you for listening to this video. It was really fun to make. I really enjoyed searching for the information, and I'm actually gonna leave all the resources I used on the description on a document. Really hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any other suggestions or just like your opinion even, please leave them in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, make a comment, and if you like the video, please share it with friends and family, because that will really help me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.